You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
And we're back with another episode of One Free Family. This is James.
And Taylor.
Old giggly Taylor. We just got through our sound check and we are ready to bring you another fun week of parenting thoughts. Hooray.
Yay.
Yay. So this week will be a little bit different than our usual routine. Mostly we got a little bit thrown off our routine. Something else came up on Monday, so we are recording this at nighttime, and at nighttime we get a little loopy.
So we're going grab bag.
Grab bag. It's officially time for
We're not going to dive
bag.
too deep into any one thing. We're too tired for that tonight. I think we're going to go grab bag, and we've got a lot of good topics that won't need a whole episode.
Yeah, we've
so
got
we're
a
excited.
bag full of topics.
And we're going to grab them.
Yeah, we like to do this with our Wednesday lives when we can find time for those, although you had a meeting this week. So we
okay,
also
so
didn't do Wednesday live.
weekly Wednesday live. It's weekly Wednesday.
Yeah, semi-weekly.
Live. Didn't happen this week. I scheduled a postpartum doula job by mistake.
Humble brag.
And I might have scheduled with her again for the same time next week. So won't be having it again. So in place
of our weekly Wednesday live, we're going to instead be talking about topics. I just found that word. Topics that have come up in our group and on our page that lend themselves to a little bit more in-depth conversation than we like to get into on the Facebook page, but less than probably a full episode.
Great.
So
great setup.
We good? Yeah, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
That means the world to me. So let's start with something actually you posted to the One Free Family just general page, and this had to do with natural consequences. Do you want to jump into what your thoughts were there?
Sure. So I felt a little ranty about natural consequences, which I try not to be ranty, and I try to be open, and I am open and meet people where they're at. But I do feel like there's natural consequences as a term is being misused, in my opinion, by a lot of people, and especially even people kind of in the gentle parenting world. And it's one thing I think it's okay if people want to impose consequences the way they're imposing them, if that works for their family, but I just don't really want to be calling them natural consequences.
Okay, so let's take a step back here for a second, because can you just define for yourself?
I'm going to do it.
Instead of, I feel like it's a little ambiguous.
So here's what I think natural consequences actually are.
Okay.
In my opinion, natural consequences are something that would happen to somebody as a result of an action they took or did not take without anybody else interfering. So without anybody taking any action or without anybody not taking any action that they would typically take. So I'm going to give an example right now.
I was going to give a better example.
I'm going to do it.
Okay.
So let's say I get home from work and I'm walking into the house and I know it's about to rain and I walk past my kid's bike. This is what I shared on our Facebook page and our Instagram, One Free Family. If I saw that bike and I knew it was going to rain, I would grab the bike and put it away so that it wouldn't get rained on. So for me, I think a lot of people would say that a natural consequence for a child of leaving their bike outside is that the bike gets rained on, right? And I would disagree with that if I happen to see the bike and I just leave it there on purpose to try to kind of like teach them a lesson and think that's a natural consequence. So they're just going to get their bike rained on. I happen to see it. I'm easily able to pick it up and put it away for them. Now I might still go inside and mention to them like, hey, it's going to rain. So I moved your bike inside. Let's try to watch out for that in the future. You're looking confused.
Well, no, because I guess like in my mind, their bike getting rained on actually would be a natural consequence. But I think what you're talking about is the fact that just because even if something would be a natural consequence, it doesn't mean you must let your kid experience it in order to be a good parent.
Right. And I think if I see the bike and I have the thought of that bike needs to get inside, and then I don't do something to help change that, then it isn't really a natural consequence anymore. Now, let's say the bike gets left outside and just nobody notices and it gets rained on, then that is a natural consequence, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it's one way or the other, it's still a natural consequence. It's just that in one case, you're kind of acting like a know-it-all. In this case, you're like, well, I could bring the bike in, but how will they ever learn if I don't teach them the lesson? I think if you ever ask yourself that question, then you are outside the realm of natural consequences. Like in my mind, if you like took the bike and hit it and were like, ooh, he can see what it would be like, because now the bike, I'm going to pretend like it got stolen so he can see what it feels like.
Oh, that's not very nice. You shouldn't do that.
I would never do that in a million years. But I guess, so like for me, and I had asked you this question, what actually is a good example of a natural consequence? In my mind, that would be like, I go outside barefoot a lot. sometimes I step on sharp things and it hurts my foot.
Right.
That's a very natural consequence. Like, that's a cost I'm willing to pay for the pleasure of walking around barefoot. It's very pleasurable.
It is for you.
I love it. And in that case, like, I would prefer also that people not run over and like insist that I wear shoes. Like, I'm happy to just be out and about, taking the risks that I feel are appropriate to myself within reason and just kind of doing my thing. Right.
Sure.
And I think our take generally is that the world just offers plenty of opportunity for consequences.
Right. And for kind of learning from the way we handled something and wanting to have done it differently the next time. I totally agree.
Yeah. And like, just again, the world is like a pretty cruel place in general. And like, it's pretty unforgiving. And I like to be a counterexample to that. Like, when I see someone in a tough position, even if it's one that they've earned for themselves, even if it's a bed they've made, right? I feel like the most powerful thing I can do in that situation is actually figure out if I can be helpful, right?
Definitely.
An incredible example of this actually came up in our family today, where so the new Fortnite season just came out today, right? And one of our sons had been saving his money up for something and hadn't realized that the in-game currency in Fortnite V-Bucks, that he wasn't he basically spent them on things that he shouldn't, or didn't mean to, or didn't totally know the ramifications of in the last season. So he didn't have enough V-Bucks to buy this season's battle pass, right? And he woke up and he was like kind of disappointed about that, was kind of working through it. And it's a very natural consequence, by the way. He overspent his money and didn't have enough money to get the next battle pass, right? So I don't know, in a regular world, he'd be like, oh, well, hey, I better learn my lesson. I shouldn't do this next time. But in our family, what happened was his brother ran upstairs, grabbed $10, and his brother doesn't really have very much money, grabbed $10, brought it down, and said, hey, I have this money. I don't really need it for anything. I would like to help you get the battle pass, right? And so I thought that was really cool, because his brother saw that even though he was experiencing this natural consequence, and even though it wasn't like unfair, nothing bad had happened, he took that as an opportunity to show radical generosity and kindness. And I feel like that, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I feel like he's picking up on what we're putting down, because in any world, no one would expect that you should go out of your way to have to give money to that person. But in the old, like, pay it forward category, he's like, oh, this person needs help. I have the ability to help right now. Screw teaching them a lesson. Like, I'm just going to help.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I thought that was cool. And like, I'd like to think part of that is that he's seen that kind of generosity modeled, right? And for me and my kids, I would always rather them learn that lesson. Like, so now one of our kids has apparently taken in that, okay, sometimes someone makes a mistake and it puts them in a tough position, and you can just give of yourself to help them. Right.
If I want to help them, I can, instead of insisting that they learn this lesson.
Yeah. And what a cool lesson for him to have learned along the way, by the way. And I don't even think that's the reason you have to be nice to someone, to teach them to be nice. But like, I don't know, for me, that felt like such a happier interaction than everyone just looking at that spendthrift kid and being like, see, we told you so. Now you suffer because you didn't spend your money. Like, I hope you learn your lesson. I don't know. Because I still feel like rather being in that situation, even for a split second, like he still felt that, ooh, I shouldn't have spent my V-Bucks. You know?
And again, like you said, over the course of his life, he's still going to learn important lessons about money, right? This isn't the only time that he's going to have spent his money in a way that he later wishes he hadn't, and he's not going to get help every time. So I think it's like thinking about the long game and realizing that our kids are going to learn these lessons and things are going to happen over time, and we don't have to be the people who make it harder for them. We can help them through, and even if we can't actually do anything to fix it, like we talked about last week or the week before, we can empathize with them and support them.
Yeah, for sure. And I just think it's one of the things I've brought up for summer camping conferences, at schools that I've talked to, even churches. Like, when you think about your role in somebody else's life, it's always really nice to think about how you would like people to be in your life. The people that have the most credibility in your life, the people that you look to as mentors, as role models and things like that. And just think about the things they have in common. Because I'll tell you, when I was in high school, I had a teacher who would go out of her way to very loudly and boisterously talk about the ramifications of these so-called natural consequences with this one kid who would be late and kind of careless with his homework, right? And she would point it out to him, kind of shame him, and make an example of him in front of the whole class, right? And so that stuck with me for sure. But it mostly stuck with me in that it made her seem cruel and arbitrary to me. And then on the flip side, I can remember people that have been in my life, specifically at camp, who, in spite of me being annoying and sort of unlovable at times, the people that really stuck with me and still believed in me and still were there and present with me, even as I was screwing it all up, even as I was making mistakes and coming back dirty and beaten and bruised based on my own failures, that would just sit with me anyway and be like, yeah, you screwed up. You can still do this. I feel like that's our opportunity to step in, not to impose more hardship on our kids because they make mistakes, but instead to just be ready to be there with them, to put their mistakes into context. And if the bike does get rusty and wet, be there with them, talk to them about it. If they don't have enough money saved up for something, make a new plan or whatever. But I think as soon as you put yourself in a position where you're like, ooh, what a good opportunity to create this difficult situation for someone to work through. Like, just think about how much you would appreciate that in your life, and you'd probably do it less.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I was trying hard to think of an example of something that a lot of people would call a natural consequence that isn't a natural consequence. But I think it's better left just as, if you're providing an outcome to your child for something they have done or haven't done as like a way to control their behavior, you can probably guess that that's not a natural consequence, right? If you're kind of imposing something upon them, even if it's related to what happened, or even if it kind of in your head logically makes sense that they would kind of suffer this because they did or didn't do this, if you're still having to like make that happen to them, it's likely not natural. It's more of like an imposed consequence that you're choosing to use to kind of control their behavior.
Yeah, a lot of times people will use the term natural consequence to describe like, oh, you hit your brother, so now I'm going to hit you.
Right.
Because it's like kind of a related, or like you'll be punished in the same way that you aggressed against someone else.
Right.
And it's like, okay, that's a related
It's a consequence for sure.
Yeah, but it's not exactly, again, natural, because natural implies without human intervention.
Right. As opposed to like, if you are unkind to another child repeatedly, that child might just choose not to be around you, right? That's a natural consequence because that child has been made to feel bad enough by you that they're going to kind of stay away, and you might have lost a friend. Like, that's a more natural consequence.
Yeah, I just pulled the definition of natural right off the rip and almost got it exactly. Existing in or caused by nature, not made or caused by humankind.
Look at that.
Nailed it. Cool. So I think we hit pretty well on natural consequences there. Unless you have anything else to add?
No, let's grab something else.
All right, we'll see what's else in the bag.
You're trying to make bag sounds with that wrapper?
You gave me away. I thought I had a really good bag
Was
sounds.
that Hershey Kiss wrapper?
Yeah, so let's dip back into the bag for a second. And somebody brought up, I don't know exactly who it was, so I'm sorry for a poor citation here, but they talked about the fallacy of the I turned out fine argument. And this is one that's driven me crazy since...
Let's hear it.
For 15 years. I want to say this has been bothering me. Why are you raising your eyebrow?
Because I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Bracing yourself for some rantage here? Yeah, so I turned out fine. So what this implies is that there's an individual who went through something. They're happy with where their life is now, and that's okay. But the problem part becomes when I turned out fine ends with, or the implied... And so it's okay for my kid to go through this too, or for kids in general to go through this too, or for people in a society or another country or whatever.
Or like I hear a lot of people who are trying to parent in a similar fashion to us say that their parents or other kind of older adults in their lives are saying to them like, well, why are you making all these changes? Because we did X, Y, and Z with you and you turned out just fine.
Yeah. Right. That is the most classic way that it's brought up. It's brought up defensively a lot of times, right? It's brought up...
Well, it's typically about the person who says it more than it is about who they're actually saying it to, I think.
Well, yeah, it depends. Yeah, I think anyone who's talking about whoever turned out fine is doing it in an effort to close down discussion about the topic, right? Because we know, just on a very basic level, the... so-and-so turned out fine argument, it's a pretty poor scientific analysis.
I was just going to say, right? It's quite unscientific. It's just anecdotal. And
because you can meet a 95-year-old person who smoked 2 packs a day for 60 years, but it would be pretty silly to say, well, hey, George turned out fine, and he smoked 2 packs a day for 60 years.
Let's all do it,
I can smoke 5 cigarettes a day. We know that that's a really unscientific way of thinking, and it's not very... It doesn't really provoke discussion, because you're basically stating in... just a fact in that case, but you're not, but you're implying that should also be indicative of future results, right? So you're saying, for whatever the topic is, oh, you don't spank your kids, we spanked you, and you turned out fine. Mm-hmm. So what are the myriad problems with this? Okay. So I think it was Bastiat who talked about the difficulties that come from comparing the seen to the unseen, right? So in the case of the person who was spanked as a child, that person might be a very well-adjusted person in their 50s now, having a great life, peaceful, kind, nicest guy you could meet, well off, whatever. But claiming that person turned out okay is a silly observation, because all it talks about is the scene. Okay, we know, okay, this individual person turned out okay, cool. But what about the unseen? We have no idea what types of things that person struggled with in life, how their life could have been different in either direction, right?
How they have to work really hard every time their own kid frustrates them to not default to that, right? You're not seeing all of these things.
Yeah, maybe not, right? But we just have no idea mostly is the big thing. And so on that level, it's just mostly a fail, because you can never say that someone couldn't have turned out even better or even worse than they did, right? So
you'll never know.
You just will never know. And individuals are so unique that it is impossible to determine what has actually all the little things along the way that could have led to the person being who they are. And again, if you go back to the other fallacy of this, which is the sample size issue, which is, one person could experience the death of their parents when they're very young and turn that into a motivating and powerful experience that leads them to go on and change the world, right? Like this person could turn out to be Mother Teresa or something, and they could say, the most impactful moment in my life was when my parents died growing up. But you'd never say, well, geez, we should kill everyone's parents so they all turn out like Mother Teresa or this person, right?
Of course not.
We would not argue for that.
Right.
And so again, and that's almost the correlation and causation fallacy, where it's okay, you turned out fine and this thing happened, but we don't know necessarily that one informed the other.
Right. And there's so many variables, and you can't isolate which variable led to which outcome. Right,
exactly. And do you have something to say? I'm just going.
You just go.
I don't feel like I should, but I guess
you should just keep going.
So, and the last piece is, and this is something I've talked about in more of an affirming way from time to time, but I think it applies to the negative too, unfortunately, which is that whatever we're doing as parents only shifts the probabilities around. So let's not over dramatize the role of any individual parenting decision, right? So certainly if you do enough terrible things to your kids, you can create a situation where it's pretty likely that your kid will not turn out fine. And these are well documented. You can look at the ACE scores and the adverse childhood experiences studies, and you can see that certain behaviors will generally lead to trauma, which will then lead to worse outcomes later in life. I think that's pretty safe to say, but you can do all manner of terrible things to a child, and that child still has a chance to turn out okay. Now, if a child that goes through all that turns out okay, you would never argue in favor of doing any of those things in any sort of credible or scientific fashion, right? So as parents, I think we can look at things, and we're never going to know what the exact percentages are, but all we're trying to do is every day get in there with our kids and slightly move these needles around to the best of our ability in favor of positive outcomes and away from negative ones.
Yeah, and I would also say that something that I've learned over the years of being a parent, and I still have so much to learn, but is that I feel like if every decision we make, we are making because we are only thinking about the future, I think we miss out on a lot of what's happening right now too. So when we think about, let's see, I feel like this kind of "you turned out fine" thing is used a lot when people talk about spanking kids. I know for me, even if for some reason I felt like, oh, well, this is going to teach him and he'll probably turn out fine because all these other people turned out fine. Is that really what I want my child to experience in the moment? Right? I don't think anybody who's spanking their child wants their child to be experiencing pain. They think that they're teaching them something helpful for the future. Right. And I know if I can pull it back, and you can be talking about less extreme things than spanking, but if I pull it back and think about what matters to my child right now, it's also that they don't experience pain or suffering in the moment. And I think what a lot of mainstream parenting misses is that childhood matters too, right? Like our kids' experiences and their lives matter so much today. It's not only about how they turn out. I mean, of course that's important and we want them to turn out to be like happy and thriving adults, but I also want them to be really, really happy and whole now. And I don't want them to pay the price now for a better life later. And I know it's maybe trite or cliche, but we're not really guaranteed anything more than this moment right now. And I really want that for my kids to be something that I remember and hold on to.
Yeah.
So that kind of you turned out fine, even though you underwent all of these things that maybe weren't so kind, argument for me just holds no weight, because what about just the present moment for your children too, right? I think that it really matters.
Yeah. For some reason, it's our society's tendency to really underweight the importance of the present and to have, living in the moment almost be seen as a hedonistic or, just sort of like opulent person going in there and just eating only cake and getting drunk or whatever. And it's like, no, you can just be joyful in the moment. You can.
And mindful and present.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean necessarily that everything that brings you joy now will take away from joy in the future. I think a lot of people view hardship, and this actually goes back to the natural consequences thing, they view that as an investment that has known returns almost.
Exactly. And again, there's no guarantee on that either, right?
Absolutely not. I think even if you think you're shifting probabilities around, I think it's worth understanding that the time that you're most likely to get is the time closest to right now.
Exactly.
And so every minute or day or year that passes after that, the opportunity that you get to enjoy that becomes less and less and less. And even if it's quite likely that you'll live till you're 30, 40, 50 and beyond in the United States currently, it's certainly not guaranteed, but the next minute or two probably is. So
I have a question then.
Yeah, I have more about I turned out fine too. But
it's about that.
Yeah,
do you want to go first? Do you have any helpful ideas for people who maybe have, like, let's say to our listeners who maybe have other older generations telling them, well, you turned out fine and we did this to you or whatever. Do you have any helpful ideas for people who are kind of trying to weather that or...
So looking for good comebacks? I can think of some good comebacks.
Oh no, you made me cough.
You weren't supposed to cough on
I know. Well, I wasn't exactly thinking comebacks per se, but ways to respond, I mean, to that person in the moment, and then ways to kind of carry that yourself and be able to hear that and still kind of stay grounded in what you believe to be best for your family. Well,
first of all, I would affirm their statement, which might be surprising. I would say, you're right. I'm really happy with how I turned out. If that's true.
Right.
If you're not, then you should mention that probably.
Yeah.
So you're right. I'm really happy how I turned out. And I would never judge anyone, certainly, for making whatever parenting decision they make, given the information that is available to them at the time.
Right.
And as we all know, like, nothing that we can do guarantees anything in parenting or in life. And so all I'm trying to do is keep looking and keep searching and try to find the best things for me to do now. And so you're right. I'm really happy with how I turned out, and I wouldn't change a thing about how the way I was raised. And at this point in my life, I'm just going to keep seeking answers and keep looking for more. And
so kind of portraying that idea of like, as I get more information or as more information comes to light, I'm going to make decisions based on that information.
Yeah, just to give them an insight into my decision-making process. Yeah. It doesn't have to be about anyone having to feel defensive or to feel like a lot of people do take it personally when they hear that you're making an important decision in a way that they don't make that same decision.
Sure.
And that's just been my experience from, how we've earned our money to how we lived our life to how we parent and beyond. And that's okay. That's natural. That's understandable, actually. And I can relate to that because I felt that way when somebody has challenged me, even implicitly, by the way that they're living. And I know for most people, it's just going to be too much to really question all their underlying assumptions about whatever area. And especially if they're just out of the game now. Like if you're done parenting, I don't need to sit and lecture you about parenting. What good's that going to do? Make you feel bad?
Right.
You don't get to another crack at the plate, right? So, so I would just listen, understand why they're saying. If they had serious concern for my kids, I think you can go back and we should dig up what episode this is, but we talk about owning our unpopular decisions and
the early ones. I think.
Talking about the idea of an opinion story where you just simply share the story of how you've arrived at the way you're parenting now and the little pieces of information and the nuggets of inspiration that have come along that have led you to land where you are now. So I guess that's how I would answer it. And I guess additionally, and this is kind of where I was going, it's a little bit off topic now, but before we move on to the last one, I think connecting with or empathizing with people who are using this argument is important. And especially if you feel this arising in your own mind, well, I turned out fine. This happened to me and I turned out fine, so I'll do this to my kid. I think it's important to understand where that comes from, because I think it can help us have a better connection to the people that feel that way, and give ourselves a little bit of grace when it comes to working through what I believe to be a pretty unhelpful way of looking at things. And it reminds me of, I joined a fraternity in college, and as soon as I became a member of the fraternity, I had some pretty serious questions about the pledging process, because pledging at my fraternity was actually rather tame compared to some stories that you hear elsewhere, but it certainly involved, it was an unpleasant process, and I didn't really feel like there was a ton of growth that came from it. And when I started asking questions of people, basically the unanimous things was, well, we went through it. And
so now you have to.
And now we turned out okay. And it just seemed like the most uncritical position to me until I really broke down in that context where it was coming from. And I think by and large, it was almost like a defense mechanism to not have to deal with the fact that, or to compartmentalize the fact that they were dealing with an unfair situation or an optimal situation. And if you tell yourself that some unpleasant thing that happened to you was necessary or even beneficial, then that makes it a lot easier to weather, especially if the unpleasant thing was happening at the hands of someone you really care about or who really cares about you. And so it's like that instinct, that gut reaction is also a way to stand up for or defend the people that may have perpetrated one offense or another against you. And it doesn't have to be anything grievous, or, they didn't have to beat you up or, do anything horrible to you, but it's just a way of not having to work through that amount of, even if it's a small amount of trauma and
an experience that you did not enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and for people that have made their peace with the unpleasant aspects in their life and they're like, hey, I'm here, I turned out okay. I think it's understandable that they wouldn't want to revisit that, right?
Yeah,
and wouldn't want to have to go back and think critically about something that they've already made peace with. So I feel like I can have a decent amount of patience for people that are approaching it from that angle. I think it's still okay to stand up for what you believe in that context. You don't have to just let them say, oh yeah, for your family it works to spank your kids. Great. That's what you do. I think you can just say, if you feel like you have some truth or you feel like something is right and something is wrong, you can feel free to say it. But I don't think you need to take it personally when someone attacks your parenting from the old "you turned out fine" angle.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of helps to consider the person saying it to you and what your relationship is with that person. I know for me, if somebody who I had never met before kind of made an offhand comment about something I was doing in my parenting, I might not even bother if I was never going to see them again and it was just a random stranger at a gathering or something. On the other hand, if it was my mom, I would try to have empathy for her and kind of talk to her about where I was coming from, because my relationship with her is very important to me and I really, really love her. So I think that, and it's important to me that she has a relationship with my kids and so on and so forth. So I think it also is wise to maybe consider the person who is saying it and consider if your energy is worth it, because in some cases we can also just choose to walk away if it's not really an important relationship
or turn
to
your
us.
phone off.
Or if we know we're not going to change any hearts and minds or even get anybody to just if it's not somebody whose support or understanding we need or want, I think it's okay to also just let it go.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah. Great. Cool.
So last one or maybe two topics before we go here. Reach into the bag.
Oh, that's a good bag sound.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hopefully that came through on the mic. This is a cool post, and this one won't be a long one, but I thought it was a really neat example. Came out of our One Free Family Facebook group, and the writer, I won't say her name in case she doesn't want me to.
Can I set this up a little?
Please.
This one is more of less of a huge conversation, and I think more of a celebration of the things that our kids can do that really just fill us up and make us smile. Okay.
Great. So she shares, there was a night where she was tired and grumpy. They were late to an appointment because one of her children and another child weren't doing what they needed to do. And so she was stressed. she released the frustration on him, and she wasn't feeling great about it. But then he got up, gave her a hug, and said, "I love you, Mommy." And she reflected that completely turned things around. And then a couple of days later, she felt like she actually learned that lesson from him. And instead of getting in there and trying to intervene or whatever, she just gave him a hug and listened. And she felt like the big feelings passed more easily than they would have otherwise. And I just thought that was a really cool thing to share. And it's, again, something I think we've observed in our family too. Sometimes I think it's just one of those, another classic example of where our relationship with our kids can be beneficial for all of us involved. One of the really neat ways of thinking about children that actually my brother Kyle shared with me, it's kind of like mystical in explanation, but the practical reality of it I find really, really helpful, is that like my brother compared a child to a wise master that has been presented before you that's going to help teach you things that you're unaware that you need to learn, right? And so the example he gave was, say you got put into a room and there was a kid in there, and the only context you had was 5 minutes earlier, you had went to study under the person you thought was the wisest person in the world. He said, go into that room. And then there was a child, and how you would approach that interaction with that child and how different that would be than you would if you just walked into a random room and there was just a child there.
Without that setup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for me, that example, I mean, it's actually been such a powerful one in so many ways, because obviously no wise master, as far as I'm aware, has put our kids in our house with us. But if we view each situation as a cool, like, opportunity for learning, I don't know, interactions with kids can become, even the mundane ones can become a lot more interesting.
Well, and I would say especially this example that you shared isn't as much of one where a child was being challenging, but the ones where our kids do challenge us, I think we learn so much from too. Like, especially if we can hold on to that mindset. But yeah, I really do just love when we have moments and when we can celebrate and notice those moments of our kids really showing us grace and our kids kind of being with us the way that we strive to be with them. Just yesterday or the day before, I was doing dishes and our oldest came over and just kind of put his arms around my waist and gave me a hug and said, "I love you, Mommy." I said, "Oh, I love you too. I'll take a hug from you anytime. Thanks." And then he kind of stepped back and he looked at me and he said, "Mommy, I feel like you just haven't really been yourself lately, and like things maybe you've just like been having a harder time, and I want to see if you're okay." And it was just, I think he was picking up on that I had been sick for like over a week and just totally didn't have as much energy as usual, was probably getting frustrated more easily and just generally seeming kind of down. And it was just so beautiful that he had picked up on it and that he had stopped and taken time to like check in with me and ask me about it. And it also kind of broke my heart a little because I think our kids really, really feel our energy and carry the weight of our energy. And I actually heard Fiona's voice in my head, who we had on our show a few weeks ago, kind of saying, "It's okay. They don't need you to be perfect." But it was just a really beautiful moment of him, like, just kind of pointing out that he had noticed that I wasn't myself and showing me some extra just love during that time. Yeah,
I thought that was a really powerful moment in our house. And it sounds like the person in our Facebook group had a similarly powerful moment. And you're right. The example I gave from my brother doesn't really fit here. This is just like our kids overtly going out of their way to teach us something.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be a reflection of things we've done with them in the past too. But I think when we can set aside, like what I thought you did beautifully in that moment was not take it personally, not take it as an attack on you having been the perfect parent for.
Well, I took it personally a little bit.
But you didn't do it. You didn't do it in a defensive way. You didn't say like, "What do you mean I haven't been myself?" Or like, you know, you just kind of, you let the power of that statement sit with you. And you were like, whoa, like you were just let yourself be knocked back by it in a way that really honored his experience. And like, I don't even know if you did it to him or if it was a long exchange. He kind of went off and did his thing.
Yeah.
But like, I could see that you gave his perspective a lot of significance. And I think that's just such a great precedent to have in your house, right? It's such a great dynamic where everyone is capable of seeing each other and seeing how we're doing. Because I feel like so often those kind of communications only come from top down, right?
Right.
It only comes from the parent coming in and saying, son, we need to have a talk. What's been going on recently, right?
Right. To like have a family where an 8-year-old is noticing that maybe his mom's a little off and just showing her some extra love and affection is really beautiful.
And, and elects to check in. You know? And
totally.
I think that's, it's what we all hope for, I think, to be able to give and receive generous feedback to one another. And I don't know, it was really, really cool. And I don't know, it made me feel really grateful to go out of our way to prioritize, respectful
connection and
connection-based interactions. And I think we talked about this on the live last week as it pertained to kids being out in public, but I think it just relates to, I think it was last week's podcast, as a matter of fact, where we talked about the learning that takes place that we're not even aware of, right? And I think when we can create space in our own mind, we can observe all that so much more easily.
Totally.
Cool. So I think actually, what do you want to do? We can talk about this one here, or we can just call it.
I think we should wrap it up, because that last piece, I think that there's more we could tie it into and almost make it a whole episode. So
great.
Cliffhanger. Y'all will have to wait for that one.
Yeah, or we'll just tell you if you join the One Free Family Facebook group. As we always say, it's one of our favorite places on the internet. We read all the posts in there and try to respond to them, even if we're very busy and tend not to social media much during the week. We always take at least one day during the week to
I try to sometimes get back to it like in a batch of responses. I really, really deeply appreciate the group and all of the sharing and all of the support that people are offering each other there, and just love being able to come in there and kind of hear what people have to say and respond. So
absolutely,
thanks to everyone who's in there and so supportive and positive and active, and for all the questions that keep coming in. We love it.
Yeah, and thanks for joining the discussion. Thanks for everything you sent into the grab bag. I'll put it away for now. And
oh my gosh.
What?
Nothing.
I was just setting the grab bag down.
Okay, good job.
Thank you so much. So I think we're going to get going.
So thanks for joining us on this journey. And just remember that each moment is a new chance to be the parent that you hope to be.
Love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.